Donald Trump defies all conventional political gravity. Usually you would think that if somebody gets arrested, if somebody gets indicted, their poll numbers would go down. In every case, his have gone up.
If you thought President Trump was a little over the top in his harsh criticism of the dishonest and out-of-control news media, it was just a warm-up act for the smackdown that came on Friday.
Because the press honestly is out of control. The level of dishonesty is out of control.
Trump tweeted today that the fake news media is the enemy of the American people.
The fake news media, he tweeted, failing New York Times, NBC News, ABC, CBS, CNN, is not my enemy. It is the enemy of the American people.
This started the day that he and Melania Trump came down that escalator, leading into, 3 long years of what turned out to be nothing but lies and conspiracy theories peddled by fake news, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, 3 broadcast network, the Washington Post. They all seem to be wrong. Wonder if in some odd way they took a man like Donald Trump and they actually have turned him into a victim, and people see through this, and none of what they now do matters to people because of all the fundamental unfairness that led up to this point.
We have gaps in this country. People say a gender gap. There's this gap. There's that gap. The biggest gap we have is actually between the mainstream media and the American people. College-educated Democrats who are really reporters, the mainstream media, ABC, NBC, CBS, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and their failure to understand the country they live in outside its elite bubbles, its cities, its college-educated campuses. It is such a disparate group of people. But the majority, of course, are those type of Americans who are not the college-educated Democrats, reporters. And that's why they missed the story of 2016. And that's why I think that you have still so many people cheering for the defeat of Donald Trump who are out of touch with such a huge swath of this country. Donald Trump, to his credit, is intuitively in touch with them.
When we think of the media in this country, the problem is that they have a sense of self-righteousness, a double standard on issue after issue after issue. They can find everything wrong with somebody else, but they will not look inside and ever admit that they could be wrong themselves.
And while other presidents like Richard Nixon have had their enemies lists and clashes with the news media, none of them in the modern era publicly accuse the media of being an enemy of the American people.
You know, President Eisenhower in his farewell address wrote about and warned against the power of the military-industrial complex. If I make a farewell address, I think I would warn against the media elitist complex.
None of them in the modern era publicly accuse the media of being an enemy of the American people.
I think we ought to hear a little bit of discussion of the imperial media and its power.
Using enemy, a word that Richard Nixon used, but in private.
On the part of Donald Trump, we are seeing a president who is behaving and acting unhinged. The President of the United States did not publicly declare the press an enemy of the people and seek to undermine the First Amendment and the very legitimacy of what the press did.
Do you think that the First Amendment has been misused or abused by reporters?
Oh, no question about it. Let's face it, Sullivan versus New York Times is in effect a license to lie because they can tell an untruth, print an untruth, which some of them consciously do.
It's time to recognize that what we are watching in the Trump presidency is worse than Watergate.
Some would say, but what about libel suits? Forget it. After the Supreme Court's decision in Sullivan versus New York Times a few years ago, a public figure cannot collect in a libel suit against a newspaper or television unless he can prove malice. And there's no way that that's going to be possible.
Well, and by the way, it was 1972 when then President Richard Nixon told his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, that the press is the enemy. He did it in private, though.
Is there any way to get some kind of a handle on this situation? Should the media be investigated? Should it be controlled?
I do not want government control under any circumstances or government censorship of either radio, television, or newspapers. But I'm simply suggesting here that all of the media should look within themselves, look through that microscope at themselves, look in the mirror now and then.
His reporting with Bob Woodward during the Nixon administration helped expose the Watergate cover-up that led to President Nixon's resignation.
Today, one of the journalists who broke the Watergate scandal, which led to Nixon's demise, Carl Bernstein, told a reporter that Trump's tweet demonstrates an authoritarian attitude and may be more insidious and dangerous than Nixon's attacks on the press.
We know there is a cover-up. We know that people in the White House, including the President of the United States, have been lying, that his family has been lying. And at the same time, we cannot make an assumption of guilt of either obstruction of justice or, quote, collusion. He is also, Mueller, looking into possible coordination between the Russians and Trump associates in the campaign, and that would include members of Trump's family. We cannot make an assumption of guilt of either obstruction of justice or, quote, collusion. This whole investigation is going increasingly, from what we can see, to the question of collusion, a conspiracy perhaps to engage with Russians to impede and interfere in the election.
Is it true the evidence gathered during your investigation did not establish that the president was involved in the underlying crime related to Russian election interference as stated in Volume 1, page 7?
We found insufficient evidence of the president's culpability.
So that would be a yes.
Without, pardon?
That would be a yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
What we have seen in this latest episode is the willingness of Trump's family to be open to subversion of the American electoral process by a hostile foreign power.
Isn't it true the evidence did not establish that the president or those close to him were involved in the charged Russian computer hacking or active measure conspiracies, or that the president otherwise had unlawful relationships with any Russian official? Volume 2, page 76, correct?
I leave the answer to our report.
The Republicans on Capitol Hill thus far have done almost everything they can to impede and undermine legitimate investigation.
Is that any true your investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with Russian government in the election interference activity? Volume 1, page 2, Volume 1, page 173.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Come to Fox News, come to CNN, come to MSNBC, based on where they think they're going to get facts as they like them. We need to do something contrary and give them facts as they exist.
The investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government in its election interference activities.
The lies take place as part of the larger story, and we need to be putting those two elements together so there is always context to pointing out his lies.
Most people who voted for Donald Trump don't like the mainstream news media, and they cheered him all campaign long when he criticized the press.